Alright, welcome back. So in this video, we're now going to go over the next section, and we're now going to start talking about what I call a performance level, right? So that's very important. I've actually decided to combine the next three sections in the book in this video. It's actually, because they're all related to performance level, I think it's easy enough to explain it on in person versus writing it, so I think it'll just be easy to combine all of them. So far, we've been talking about the negative mind state and the positive mind. We now know that your negative mind is the result of your subconscious compelling the conscious mind while it's in its ground state, which is in that state when it's primarily being controlled by the body or commanded by the body. Your positive mind, or your transcendental mental abilities, are the result of the subconscious compelling the conscious mind when the subconscious is primarily being controlled or commanded by the conscious mind, right? And so when it's primarily being controlled by the conscious mind, it's in this excited state, not this ground state. I meant to say last chapter, just to give maybe a little more of a visual, the more the conscious mind, the last video, the more the conscious mind charges the subconscious, you could think of it as it getting more and more excited, right? Just like an atom. As an atom gets more and more energy, you could say, I don't know if thermal energy is the right word if we're just talking about one atom, but you can say as it gets more and more kinetic energy, the atom as a whole, it'll vibrate more and more and more. That's kind of how I think of the subconscious. As the conscious mind charges it more and more and more, so it gets more and more and more energy as a result of the commands from the conscious mind, it starts gets more and more and more excited, and that results in more powerful compulsions and more powerful transcendental mental abilities in the ways that we've defined what it means to have more energy for those abilities. So it basically becomes useful at this point to talk about the performance level. So what is the performance level? That performance level basically refers to how well you're able to carry out or perform some activity. So far we've been saying that the negative mind, or your normal mental abilities, are generally, the way we talked about it for imagination, or altered states of perception, so for imagination, for belief, creativity, controlling your body, the way we've been talking about it seems like the positive mind is pretty much always able to do these things better, right? Now, of course, it depends on how you define better, but in most cases, I think we would both have an intuitive definition where we kind of make sense of what it means to be better, right? The positive mind can just do them better. So in other words, if the conscious mind is charging the subconscious to perform a certain activity, and your subconscious charges properly, you're generally going to be able to perform the activity better than when your body is just charging your subconscious to help you perform that activity. So in other words, the negative mind performance level is pretty much always, there might be some super outlier exceptions where you might be able to charge the subconscious to perform at a lower performance level than the negative mind would when it's in its ground state, but I've never done that myself. I've never experienced that. There's a theory I made up, so there's no research on it, but even if that could happen, it's not very important. Majority of the time, pretty much always, and I see this when I observe other people too, right? Pretty much almost always, the positive mind's performance level is going to be higher than the negative mind, right? So in other words, for example, let's say I want to be a conversationalist. I want to tell jokes and make good conversation. Now I can do that without charging from my mind, charging my subconscious from my conscious mind at all, right? So I'm using my negative mind's performance level, which requires no charging. That's generally never going to be as good as when I charge my subconscious specifically to help me with being a conversationalist. We'll talk about how to do that later. In chapter 13, we talk about how to charge the subconscious for performance. Because so far we've talked about other transcendental mental abilities, but we haven't really talked about the purposes you would use to charge your subconscious. So you can use it to charge it for emotion, right? And just to feel some emotion more intensely, and that's very enjoyable when it's positive. But pretty much all your other transcendental mental abilities, so transcendental control, transcendental imagination, transcendental belief, or transcendental creativity, or intelligence, all of those pretty much go under the concept of performance level. So when you're charging for any one of those, you're charging generally to perform better in some way, right? So this is the proper way to think about how to use your subconscious mind. So when I'm charging it, I'm pretty much always focused on one of those two dynamics. Either I want, we'll talk more about the spiritual stuff later, because there's stuff I haven't gotten over yet. That's in the second book. But for now, for the secular stuff, you're pretty much only thinking in terms of emotion or performance, right? So one of those two, because if you charge for emotion, that has nothing to do with performance, right? You don't care about performance. You just want to feel good, right? But if you want to charge performance, if you want your subconscious to help you perform some activity well, then you want to charge your subconscious in a way where you're now focused on your performance level. So that's very important. It's good to get used to thinking about controlling your subconscious and what you want to do with it in these two paradigms, right? These two possibilities, right? You're generally either going to do it for emotion or performance, right? So it took me a kind of a while of controlling my subconscious, getting used to doing different things with it until I eventually just kind of thought of it in these two possibilities. So yeah, when you're charging it, right now we're just going to be talking about performance level, not emotions. So yeah, just to restate it, the negative mind's performance level is pretty much always lower than the positive mind's. So if you want to perform something better, you want to go transcendental. So you want to charge your subconscious with your positive mind. Now, is there anything else I want to say? Yeah. So now, I think I said it already, but when you have your normal performance level, because it's being charged by your body, the benefit to that is that you can do that anytime you want to, right? You don't have to charge it. It doesn't take time because your body's doing all the work. You can do it at any single time, all day, every day, right? So the negative mind performance level you get for free, except when you're dreaming, because the body stops. We'll talk about. Don't know if I mentioned it. We're going to talk a little more about dreaming. I think I said most of it anyway. But we'll talk a little bit more about dreaming in the next chapter. But you notice when you're dreaming, you don't have your normal performance level, and that's because the body isn't charging it anymore. But when you're charging by the conscious mind, that actually has a charging component, right? The negative mind doesn't have that. The positive mind does have a charging component. So to go transcendental or perform at the transcendental level, or to get to your transcendental performance level, that always requires charging and it requires time. So that's the one downside to it. You could say, if you want to say pros and cons, the upside to the negative mind is that it gives you a certain amount of capability at any time you want to without having to charge it, but that capability is more limited, right? The positive mind, you get way more capability, or you could perform at a much higher level, and you could do it for way more things, but it takes time. It has to charge, so that's the downside to that. So, down to get to this next point, this is important. The differences in the makeup of the brain and body result in different normal performance levels. And then it says transcendental performance level generally has no clear limit. And then that ties into this next thing, so I'll just say it and I'll go over both. So the ground state charges the subconscious to help with everyday tasks, but charges on a spectrum. Occasionally it charges too much in some areas and not enough in others. So what are these two things referring to? So basically, so far I've been talking about the ground state. So I said the body sends commands to your subconscious. Your body charges your subconscious in a very specific way that we've just been calling the ground state. In that ground state, it compels the conscious mind in a way that results in the normal performance level, which comes from the conscious mind obtaining the negative mind properties that we've been talking about. Now, the thing is the way I've said it, I made it sound like everyone's ground state is the same. That's not exactly true, right? So just as we all have a basic framework, right, of our genetics that makes us human, right? Everyone has two hands, right, two eyes, one head, one body, you know what I mean? So everyone has basically the same framework of genetics, right? But even genetics still occurs on a spectrum, right? A person may have different eyes. Some people may have different color eyes. They may have different color hair. Some people are taller. Some people are shorter. Some people tend more toward others say obesity, but they tend to be a little more husky. Some people tend to be a little more thin, and so on and so forth, right? So genetics are expressed on a spectrum. Well, that same thing actually also occurs for your brain. When your brain is charging your subconscious, it charges it on a spectrum, right? So your brain charges the subconscious. So with primal emotions, we basically talked very specifically about just a few emotions. Pretty much it was just three of them: anxiety, sexuality, and the danger frequency. And there may be a little others, but those are the main ones I wanted to cover. So it's very clear, very distinct. But the ground state is completely different. Your subconscious your body charges your subconscious in a very specific way. And what it does is it charges it, and we'll talk a little bit more about the biology of that in chapter 6. But chapter 6, the next chapter. But the subconscious charges the body charges your subconscious in a very specific way that helps you to perform everyday tasks, right? So without charging, right? So your normal performance level, it basically charges it to make sure that your normal performance level is adequate in multiple different areas that you would perform every day, so you don't have to go through the work of charging it first, right? It would be hard for you to survive like that. So in other words, if I want to solve math, right, when I try to solve a math problem, I hold a specific kind of intention. My subconscious switches to a certain frequency, and then it compels me in a way that alters what's rational to me and what's logical to me, and it does it in a way that makes it easy for me to solve math problems, right? If I want to solve a puzzle, it does that exact same process. If I want to speak or learn a language, my brain charges my subconscious in a way that affects what's rational to me to help me to learn languages. That's why babies have easier time learning language. In the ground state for a human would be different from the ground state of an animal, right? And that's why animals generally have much harder time with any of this stuff, right? Their ground state, their body isn't charging their ground state and has sophisticated a way as us humans. So basically everyday task, your body charges your ground state in a way to make it easy for you to perform this task, easy for you to perform this task, right? If I want to even get a sense of spatiality, how close is this to me? Your ground state helps you to do that. The way your body's charging your subconscious in its ground state helps you to do that. So simple abilities like art, conversation, solving math problems, reading, writing, making music, like anything you can really think of, speaking, right? Anything you can really think of that you would just do every day, everyday tasks that we take for granted, right? Your subconscious is actually your body is actually charging your subconscious to help you perform those tasks. And every single time you want to perform a specific kind of task, some part of your brain becomes a little more active. And then it's hard to say that part of the brain sends a command, but suffice it to say, some part of your brain is responsible for a particular activity or plays a role in a particular activity. So some part of your brain basically lights up, it becomes more active, the brain sends a command to your subconscious and helps you to perform the activity. And it all happens so fast, right, that you don't even really notice it, right? I never knew this until I started charging my subconscious with my conscious mind, which all of this works differently when you're charging it through your conscious mind. But when it's just your body, it all occurs so quickly that there's no real need to even think about the subconscious involvement in it. That's why most people just think their conscious mind is responsible for doing all this stuff when it actually isn't, right? And you can tell when you're dreaming, you lose these abilities all of a sudden. When your body gets damaged, you lose these abilities. And that's because your body's no longer able, or your brain is not able to charge your ground state in the same way. Then that instantaneity that you normally experience to doing these things is suddenly gone. So that those circumstances reveal that the subconscious actually is involved in them too, those circumstances too, even though it works very quickly. So I say all that to say that, so getting to this part, it charges on the body charges the subconscious on a spectrum, occasionally charges too much in some areas and not enough in others. So just as some people are more tall than other people or shorter, the body can command the subconscious in a way where it's charging your ground state to help too much with this activity, but not enough with this activity. And so that gives people different natural performance levels or different normal performance levels, right? So like if you ever seen someone who's like asexual, right? So it's like they just have no attraction to sex. They don't care about it. that's because their brain isn't charging it that much. For whatever reason, their brain just doesn't charge that primal emotion very much. So something went wrong, because that primal emotion is very important to the body so that the species can continue, right? So if something goes wrong, then that person just doesn't feel sex that much. They can still charge it through the mind if they know how, but the body doesn't do it, right? So most people, the reason it's such a strong impulse is because they don't have to charge it through the mind, right? That takes time. That takes a while. Most people don't know how to do that. So the body, that's the exact reason the body doesn't like to leave it to the mind, right? So the body does it automatically for you, so you don't have to do anything. But again, if something goes wrong, then a person just won't feel that much sex. So sometimes that much of a sexual desire. But for other people, that urge is too strong, right? So now it's all they can think about. And it impacts their ability to kind of function normally in society because it's coming in way too strong all the time, right? Some people experience way too much anxiety, right? So I feel like I'm like that, right? So with public speaking and so some social circumstances, although I'm much better now with those social circumstances. I still hate public speaking, but some people experience too much anxiety. So their body has a response where it's charging anxiety way too strongly, right? Other people, it's not charging it strongly enough, right? So they may be able to take too many risks, you know what I mean? And not think enough about safety, you know? And so in other words, these different parameters, the body charges the subconscious in different areas differently. So those were for primal emotions, but it can also do it for your normal performance level. So it could charge my subconscious in a way that makes it very easy for me to do math problems and understand science. So I actually think that that's how I am, right? So it's not as much of it doesn't take as much effort for me because the part of my brain responsible for abstraction and logic and understanding math and science, relationships, things like that, that part of my brain is charging my subconscious very strongly, right? So it's a little bit easy for me to understand those things. For other people, it's not charging it strongly enough. So they have a hard time with math and science. They have to rely more on their conscious mind charging their subconscious to help them with that stuff, which takes time and it's more effort and things like that. They don't get it for free. Actually, yeah, let's go over this next point. So natural gifts are the result of the brain charging the ground state to help with some activity more than the average person. Lack of aptitude is the result of the brain not charging the ground state enough for some activity. So that's basically what I was saying. When a person is naturally gifted at something, right, it's when their brain is naturally charging their subconscious very strongly relative to some activity, and that gives them a naturally high normal performance level, right? So if someone, and the opposite, if the brain isn't charging the subconscious relative to some activity strongly enough, then they have a naturally low performance level. And low and high is always going to be relative to some base metric or some base level. So we're just going to say the average of the population, right? The average of human population, right? So if any humans, right, performance level, no matter how low it is, let's say with solving math or understanding abstract things, is always going to be way beyond the performance with the normal performance level of some animal, right? Is the animal's body is charging their subconscious in a much less sophisticated way. So their normal performance level is going to have a way harder time understanding math, using reasoning, being able to perform calculations and all that. So, but a person can still have a relatively low natural performance level compared to the average of the population. So you have to relate it to averages. And so again, a person's gifted when compared to the average population. Their brain is charging their subconscious more powerfully than the average population. So it's always relative to some activity, right? So relative to that particular activity for that gift, they're just going to notice that they tend to perform better than the average person. Like I said, for me, it was math and science. For some people, it's going to be like art, right? Or in that case, they kind of use their imagination and they can kind of create things in the real world based on their imagination much better than the average person. Like, I'm terrible at that, right? Because my brain doesn't charge my subconscious in the area that's needed. It doesn't charge it that strongly in that area. So my performance level is naturally very low. I have to charge my subconscious using my mind to, actually, let me talk about that a little bit more too. So here I say transcendental performance, your transcendental performance level generally has no clear limit. And what I mean by that is that because the negative mind's normal performance level, all right, excuse me, I had to cut the video a little bit. So yeah, like I was saying, just going back to this, the transcendental performance level generally has no clear limit. And what I mean by that is the performance level, your normal performance level, right? So the performance level that comes from your negative mind is generally very fixed because it's coming from your body. And your body doesn't change very much. So your body's mostly charging your subconscious in the exact same way. It pretty much does it every day, right? It does change very slowly over time as you get older. It can occur very quickly if you get an injury, right? We'll talk a little bit more about that here. But it's generally very fixed, right? You don't notice generally day after day that you're suddenly way better at math or you're suddenly way better at reading or abstraction. It's pretty much the same. But the transcendental performance level, that comes from charging. So when you charge the subconscious using your negative mind, so your conscious mind, so at that point, you can just keep charging and get to higher and higher and higher levels, right? So the presumption here is basically that your performance level increases the more you charge your subconscious. So as your subconscious gets more energy, and also as it gets more organized, which we'll talk about in chapter 13. So there's really no clear limit to your transcendental level. You can just keep going higher and higher and higher and higher, and I've done that before. So I used to practice charging my subconscious a lot for conversation. So I wanted to be a conversationalist, right? And I wanted to learn how to do that and be good at it. And I was. And I eventually learned how to charge my subconscious to just be good at making conversation. So I would get in the zone, right, with conversation, and I could go deeper and deeper and deeper into that zone, and my performance would increase more and more and more. So I'm just coming up with really good conversation, really good delivery. My timing is excellent. Delivery of my voice, the way I move my body, everything's good. The ideas coming to my head, all of it's flowing, right? And I can increase that ability so I can become better and better and better at making conversation. Like I said, when you go too high with the charge, then the compulsions get way too strong, and it's kind of hard to, your mind doesn't feel very stable. Because, for example, if I charge, and I've done this multiple times, so if I charge my subconscious too much to help me with conversation, now it's compelling. I'll get thoughts all day, like just racing through my mind. Ideas related to making good conversation. So they're very helpful when I'm in conversation, right? But when I'm not in conversation, they're still there, rushing and running through my mind because my subconscious hasn't discharged yet. It still has to charge. So it can kind of feel a little bit like it's too much after a while. So that's why it's like I never tried to charge to see how high I could possibly go. But generally, yes, if you keep charging, your transcendental performance level goes higher and higher and higher. So you can do it with solving math problems. That's in that case we would call it transcendental creativity. We'd call it intelligence. So I've done that with math problems. When I went through my phase studying a whole bunch of math, right? I just got in the zone with understanding math. Like I could solve problems. Like I can look at a problem and just understand its symmetries. Like for example, with a sine or cosine function, and kind of look at it and get a sense of how the graph looked. If it was symmetric about the origin or symmetric about the x or y axis, I could. That was when I was really in my I would consider it my prime back then because I was going mad hard studying math. Right? I could look at it, and calculus too. You have to study integrals. They study like the hardest integrals you could think of. Right? So I would have an easy time with that. It's like I could just see deeper. I could see the geometry of the problem, right? And just kind of solve it in my head, even like before I'm even putting it down on paper, because I'm in the zone. My subconscious has charged to help me think in a way that makes mathematics seem very logical and rational, right? So my logic or my perception is altered in a way that fits mathematics. Basically, it fits the organizational pattern of mathematics is the correct terminology in this theory. But has my energy discharged, right? As I got out of the zone more, I lost those abilities, right? So I'm not as nice with it. I'm not as good with that stuff. So when my subconscious starts to discharge all that energy, now I'm not as good as making conversation, right? The magic's gone, right? That used to happen to me all the time, and I actually talk a little bit about that in the intro of the book, right? I used to always wonder, like, man, why did I I would be in the zone one day, then I'd lose it. Like a couple days later, I would lose it. Like no matter what I did, I could not perform at the same level as I could a couple days before. And I didn't know that charging was even happening. I didn't know that happened at that time. So I didn't know that was a thing. So I kept trying to understand what was going on. And eventually that led to this whole theory. But my point is so your transcendental performance level can go as high as you want it to, right? Technically. But, like I said, it gets more uncomfortable and it goes too high. But once that energy discharges, then your performance starts to drop. And it starts to drop more and more. And then your performance goes back to the normal performance level. This is fixed. You're always going to have this, right? As long as your brain, right, is in mostly the same configuration, this is a fixed level. You can't go below your normal performance level. Your transcendental performance level is the one that changes all the time, right? Because that's charged by your conscious mind. So you can have it like crazy one day and then it could completely be gone a few days later. But you'll always at least have that level. And you see that a lot in sports, right? So you may, especially boxing, you might see a boxer, they're just super nice one day. They're like amazing. They're in the zone. Just like you can tell I think it's Buddhism or martial arts, they call it what's it called? I forgot. I think it's Wuxin in Chinese and Mushin in Japanese. But basically it's a flow state, right? And so you can see, and that's basically when you're in the zone related to fighting, right? And I think it's when you're in zone in general, but usually it refers to martial arts. But yeah, you'll see a boxer just in the zone when they're fighting, right? And it's like they're not even thinking. We'll talk more about that a little later, but yes, that's how the positive mind performs. It's very instinctive, right? So it doesn't process in the same way the negative mind does. But when you see a boxer in the zone one day, they're the most amazing, it's like the most amazing thing you've ever seen, right? But then you might see them another fight, and suddenly they're struggling. Suddenly they don't have the same ability to calculate. They don't have the same reaction speed. The way they move their body is not as smooth, right? They don't have the same, it's like they don't even have the same stamina, right? They're not moving as efficiently. They're not breathing as efficient. Like everything's different. It's like what happened? Like what happened? Why did they have this magic one day and all the magic was gone the next fight, right? It's because of this, right? They were probably in a transcendental state, or they had a transcendental performance level that fight, because in training at some point they were charging it with their minds. And then the next fight we'll talk about why this happens more in chapter 9 and 10. But the next fight they lost it, right? And so they were stuck at their normal performance level, which is way worse. That's why they weren't as impressive. Anthony Joshua, he's a boxer who struggled with this a lot, right? He's basically, I think he's going to retire soon, or he's retired now. But yeah, in his prime, he was animal, right? Because he would, like I said, I've been doing this so long, I feel like I can just look at someone and know when they're in a transcendental state. I can tell. And that's exactly what I was saying before about how when your subconscious charges up, it's going to compel you in a way that causes you to move your body in a certain way, right? And there's just going to be certain ways you move your body that give it away that you're doing a form of transcendental control and not normal control. So I can tell, right? I know the organizational patterns that fit almost every frequency, right? Which is not something you know on a conscious level. It's something your subconscious mind recognizes. You just have to learn how to recognize it on what's happening on a conscious level. And we'll talk more about that in the later chapter too. But like I said, I've been doing it so long, I can just look at someone and I feel like I could just tell when they're performing transcendentally. And Anthony Joshua used to do it a lot, right? But then as time went on, he lost the magic. So he started thinking about it too much. And as you'll see when we actually talk about how to charge energy, that prevents you from performing at a transcendental level. He's trying to stay in control too much. Control is a property of the negative mind. Controlling the subconscious, you don't control. We haven't talked about that much yet, but you don't control things with the subconscious like that, or with the positive mind. It doesn't work like that. So the more you try to stay in control, the more you're going to be leaning into your negative mind property. So your performance level is actually going to drop. That used to happen to him all the time. That probably went on a little bit of a tangent, but yeah, just good to know that your negative mind performance level is constant. You always have that, no matter what happens, you're always going to at least have that, as long as your brain hasn't changed very much, right? But your transcendental performance level goes and comes all the time. So yeah, but going back to this, a person is naturally gifted when their subconscious is charging a ground state for a particular activity more than the average. I think I went over that already, but when it does it more than the average population, and you have a natural curse or an aptitude when it charges it less than the rest of the population, right? So yeah, I think I said that. So yeah, some people are really good at math. Some people are really good at are going to be really good at art. Some people are really good at so this is also responsible even for character traits. So some people, let's say their body doesn't charge anxiety that much, and it charges their subconscious in a way. I mean, their body charges their subconscious in a way that makes them maybe naturally good at taking risk or calculating things. So that person might be a natural leader, right? I think people who are natural leaders, I think they probably charge a danger emotion a little more, so they like taking risks, but they don't charge the anxiety emotion that much. So it's very easy for them to take risks, right, without feeling a lot of fear. And so it's very easy for them to kind of take charge and be in control. You know what I mean? And if their body is also helping them to perform calculations very well and make rational decisions, then they would be a natural leader. Some people can even have natural, some people are naturally like, I want to describe it, more peaceful or more sympathetic or more empathetic. So these would be a more spiritual people, right? Their brain charges their subconscious in a way that makes them more considerate of other people, right? More caring, right? So there's a whole distribution of people in society who have different combinations of things they're a little more gifted at and things they're a little bit bad at. And everybody basically helps each other to basically compensate for each other's gifts and their curses or the things they're not good at. Before I go into that, some people even control their body much better than the average person, because that also comes from the subconscious mind. You get better control of your body when you charge your subconscious to use transcendental control. But if you don't do that, then you have normal control. So like even laughing is kind of hard to do with a normal level of control. That requires transcendental performance. So like sports players are probably people who would be good at sports players would probably be people who are good at transcendental control, as well as singers or people who are natural dancers, right? Because they can control their body much better than the average person, and they can use it for performance. So now we're comparing it to the average population, but there are even outlier cases where where the strength of a charge or the weakness of a charge is even more exaggerated. So a person has a disability when their brain charges the ground state at significantly lower levels than the average population for some activity. So for example, when a person has dyslexia, right? So it's a common reading disability, right? When that happens, it's actually because the brain is not charging the subconscious in a way that allows you to make sense of words, right? Reading words, right? Because even that is actually a subconscious compulsion. When you hold a specific intention, you're looking at symbols and you want to make sense of them, your subconscious will alter your perception and the way you think in a way that makes it easy to make sense of the words, right? Same thing it does with math. But if your brain doesn't, now your brain comes with that. Like I said, animals don't have that, so they can't read things, right? Or they would have a much harder time understanding symbols or reading things than a human. A human has, based on evolution, naturally they're born with that preset charging program basically in their brain. So the brain already comes with that charge, comes with that command in their brain and in their genetics to command the subconscious to charge it that way, is what I'm trying to say, right? So when you're a baby or you're a kid and you're growing up, you tend to have a much easier time sort of learning to read. And that's because when you're trying to read, when the child is trying to read, they hold an intention and their brain recognizes that intention. Their brain was evolved to recognize when the person or the child is going to use that intention. So it's basically there even before they do it for the first time. It's in their genetics. So when they reach a certain age and they start trying to read, that part of the brain responds. Their subconscious starts charging in a way where it alters their perception in a way that's just going to make it easier to read, even though they've never done it before. So because it's primed. I think in programming it's called abstract data structure. So it's kind of like an if you're into programming, you know what I'm talking about. It's basically like an abstract data structure. So your body charges subconscious in a way that has a preset sort of altered state of perception with words. Like I said, even though even though you've never done it, and so when the child starts reading, it's very natural to them. They have an easier time learning, right? But if their brain doesn't really have that program there or doesn't charge it that strongly, then they're going to have a hard time because it's just not going to make sense to them. The reading, their subconscious just won't compel them in a way where it's easy to make sense of symbols. And so that's where dyslexia comes from. Dyscalculia is similar, but it's with math. So that's when your brain isn't charging your subconscious in a way that makes it easy for you to make sense of math. So it's not altering your perception to make sense of math. It's doing it at a much lower level than the rest of the population. So you're considered to have a disability. So people who have that have to rely way more, they have to rely way more on their conscious mind to charge, right, to increase their performance level. But that's always going to be hard. That's going to be hard for reasons we'll get to here, this last point. But the opposite of a disability is it's not just a gift, but it's like when you have a genius level. It's when you reach what I call a genius level of performance. So when you reach genius levels, it's when your subconscious is when your body is charging your subconscious at a way higher level than the average population. So you're pretty much on the outer percentile of the whole population. I'd probably say 90 to 95% percentile. So at that point, you're basically considered a genius because your normal performance level is way above the average person's. So basically, you could think of like some of the greatest minds in history were like that. Like to me, I believe Einstein was like that. So Einstein was a genius because his ability to understand math and science went way beyond the average person's, which is why he was able to he was able to imagine things in his head and kind of make sense of it in a way that most people just could not, right? It's how he came up with special relativity and general relativity. Carl Friedrich Gauss, I don't know why he doesn't get enough notoriety in math fields, but he's one of the greatest mathematicians ever, right? In the book I talk about it too. To me, Mariah Carey, her voice is amazing. Oh my goodness. Now you might say, to me, I still describe that as a genius level, if we're going by this definition, a genius level of transcendental control. In other words, she can control her voice in a way that most people just cannot, right? So she has a genius level of transcendental performance with singing, right? So she's just amazing. To me, I think she's the best singer of all time, and I don't really think it's that close, if I'm being honest, right? So not everyone's going to have a disability, not everyone's going to have a genius level, right, of a normal performance level. Most people are in the middle. But occasionally you'll see people who are on the lower percentile or on the outer percentile. And the last thing here is that a person, this is for people with disabilities, right? So a person can always compensate for a naturally weak charge from the body by charging with their mind, but it'll always be a lifelong struggle due to discharging. So in other words, if I have dyscalculia, right, and I'm not good at math, right, I'm not naturally good at math, what I can do to make up for that is I can use my intention to charge my subconscious to be good at math. Then I'm going to go transcendental. So now I'm not limited by my normal performance level. So I can go higher and higher and higher. However, at some point, the moment I stop charging with my conscious mind, my subconscious is going to start discharging, right? It's going to start discharging, then my performance level is going to drop. And eventually it's going to go right back to my negative mind performance level. And so this is why people who struggle with certain disabilities, or if they struggle with emotions from the body like anxiety, right, they might feel really good some days, or their performance may be really high some days, but then for whatever reason, there are certain days where it just comes back. They feel that anxiety again, or their disability, they feel not as strong in their disability again as they did before. It's because of this, right? So if you charge, if you charge a subconscious for transcendental performance, it's not constant. It's going to go back the second you stop. It's going to start going back the second you stop charging. So it's always going to basically be a lifelong struggle. One thing I wanted to say now that we're here in the previous chapter about sexuality is homosexuality. I'm pretty sure that some guys do this, right? So some guys will, because sometimes it's difficult to be homosexual in society and things like that. They can use their mind to charge sexual attraction to a woman. They can do that, right? But the moment their subconscious starts to discharge that charge, they're just going to go back to their body's normal charge, right? And then they're going to be attracted to men again. So it's a struggle if they do that. They can pull it off, but it's always going to be a struggle. You know what I mean? That's pretty much how it is for any kind of disability or any charge you're trying to do beyond your normal performance level, right? So that was a lot more than I thought it was. I probably should have broken it up into other videos because this is actually broken up into 3 sections in the book. But yeah, I think we pretty much covered everything in the 3 sections. But yeah, the going forward, you want to get used to think, at least as far as controlling the subconscious, which we really don't talk about until chapter 11. But once we get there, it's good to think about when you're controlling your subconscious in these terms. You're either charging it for emotion, just to feel good, or you're charging it for performance, right? You generally want to think about what, you're trying to perform at, right? If you tell stories, right? If you want to be a good writer of stories, then you want to enhance your performance level with creating stories, which you can do with your subconscious. Now, I know that might seem, right now it might seem a little strange. Well, how do you charge your subconscious to be a good conversationalist, a good storyteller, good at writing lyrics, or good at making music, right? Or good at telling jokes, or dancing, right? Because that's a form of transcendental control. How do you do that? How do you get in the zone with those things? And it's like, it's kind of easy once you know the technique, right? It's very complicated in terms of explaining it, and that's chapter 13. But once you know the basic functions of the subconscious, you're going to see that every single one of those things charge the exact same way, right? There's no difference between them. I could charge my subconscious to do something I've never done before, right? Just because I know how the subconscious works. So I know it might seem like a lot now to charge it for something so broad. You might think you need more specific information about it. No, because the subconscious functions the exact same way in every single one of those situations. It makes no difference what it's really for, but you just have to specify in your intention what the activity actually is, right? Then the subconscious pretty much does the rest. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I think that's it for chapter 5, actually. So yeah, okay. So yeah, next we're gonna go into chapter 6 in the next video, which there we're just gonna talk about a whole bunch of miscellaneous topics for the body that didn't really fit into one central idea like these other 2 chapters. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Like I said, there's a lot of information. If you have to rewatch the video in the last video to get a sense of the new idea of a ground state in an excited state and performance level, then I recommend to do that because that's going to be very important later, right? So yeah, that's everything. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.